Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Merci d'être là. Oui, descendez un peu pour pas être collé au fond. Il y a juste Charles Tenenbaum qui a le droit d'être au fond. Donc, merci d'être là pour cette troisième conférence Afghanistan, organisée conjointement avec l'association Taishan, qui promeut donc les échanges avec l'Asie. La connaissance, une meilleure connaissance du continent asiatique qui, ma foi, est très grand, donc il y a plein de conférences. Voilà, donc en tout cas, troisième conférence, pendant laquelle on va descendre encore, mais dans le bon sens du terme, d'un niveau de réflexion. Après la conférence de Gilles Dorronsoro la semaine dernière, autour plus du système politique afghan et des raisons de l'échec des Occidentaux en Afghanistan. Là, l'idée, c'est de réfléchir à des sujets qui, me semble-t-il, intéressent un certain nombre d'entre vous, notamment les étudiants PhD, mais pas uniquement, enfin CED, pardon. C'est dans quelle mesure des ONG, des acteurs de la société civile peuvent encore travailler, intervenir aujourd'hui en Afghanistan. Donc, on a le plaisir d'accueillir ce soir 4 invités. Alors, je vais commencer par les deux extrêmes. Donc, Nassim Majidi, que vous connaissez pour certains d'entre vous, puisqu'elle enseigne ici depuis fort longtemps maintenant, le cours sur les refugees and other migrants en 5e année CED. Hervé Nicolle, qui est avec Nassim Majidi, en fait, cofondateur d'une ONG, Samuel Hall, dont ils diront peut-être un petit mot, j'imagine, en Afghanistan, qui ont travaillé pendant de nombreuses années là-bas. L'ONG existe toujours, continue à travailler, me semble-t-il, donc ils vont revenir là-dessus. Et on a le plaisir d'accueillir, j'ai oublié, alors les noms de famille c'est plus compliqué, donc Zabi et Jawid, deux collaborateurs en fait de l'ONG Samuel Hall en Afghanistan, qui ont représenté pendant des années l'ONG lorsque Nassim et Hervé ont ouvert des bureaux ailleurs, notamment un bureau à Nairobi. Voilà, donc Jawid et Zabi ont dirigé en fait, en tout cas co-dirigé l'ONG pendant de nombreuses années jusqu'à réussir à être évacués l'été dernier d'Afghanistan pour arriver presque directement à Lille où nous sommes très heureux de savoir qu'ils ont obtenu le statut de réfugiés depuis quelques semaines. Voilà. Et ils sont étudiants, comme vous le savez, à Sciences Po cette année. Donc voilà, je vous laisse la parole. Une partie de la conférence se tiendra en anglais, dans la mesure où, notamment Zabid et Jaoui, ne sont pas encore complètement fluents en français, donc c'est plus facile pour eux de s'exprimer en anglais. Mais vous pouvez poser des questions en français si vous le souhaitez. Merci.
Bonsoir à tous et à toutes. Je suis ravie de vous voir ici et d'être là parmi vous. C'est un honneur que nous fait Sciences Po Lille parce que cet été, complètement démunis par la chute de Kaboul, et on va en parler aujourd'hui, on savait qu'elle venait, mais on ne pensait pas qu'elle serait aussi rapide. J'ai tout de suite appelé Anne, qui a tout de suite appelé Pierre, et voilà, quelques mois plus tard, vous avez Zabi et Jawid qui sont là en sécurité, et on vous doit énormément. Nous, on s'est engagés en Afghanistan, on s'est rencontrés en Afghanistan, Hervé et moi, en 2008, à une époque où c'était déjà la fin de l'âge d'or de l'action de la communauté internationale en Afghanistan. Déjà, les talibans commençaient à renforcer leurs attaques sur les villes et sur d'autres zones géographiques du pays. Mais nous, on s'est engagés en Afghanistan parce qu'en fait, on voyait très bien que la qualité de l'aide, que la qualité des données, que la qualité de la recherche en Afghanistan était très très basse et que ça ne dérangeait personne. Et nous, on se disait en fait non, les standards scientifiques, les standards de recherche doivent être maintenus où qu'on soit, parce que sans données scientifiques, sans recherche, on ne peut pas construire des programmes de développement, on ne peut pas gouverner, on ne peut pas avoir un pays stable. Donc on a lancé, Hervé et moi, notre propre organisation de recherche, un centre de recherche basé à Kaboul et qui est toujours actif, du nom de Samuel Hall, une chanson d'Alain Bachung, ce qui a beaucoup plu à monsieur l'ambassadeur et ce qui a aidé à évacuer Zabi et Jawid cet été. Et notre action, donc, c'est aussi de former des chercheurs sur place, de travailler avec des chercheurs afghans, internationaux, pour soutenir les programmes d'aide, les programmes de développement et la gouvernance. Donc aujourd'hui, on est aussi en interaction avec les talibans pour avoir des autorisations de recherche, pour pouvoir continuer notre travail. Et de manière assez étonnante, ils nous disent « Allez-y, 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 faites vos recherches, on a besoin de vous, on ne sait pas quoi faire aujourd'hui, on est complètement perdu. » Donc ça, c'est ce que les talibans nous disent et on va revenir là-dessus pendant nos différentes interventions. Donc je vais commencer, puis après on va se passer la parole. I will switch to English now, so that my friends can also understand and perhaps contradict me if anything I say is wrong. But as we start the conversation today, I wanted all of you to be aware that we're preparing for the worst humanitarian crisis any of us have seen in our lifetime. The United Nations Development Programme has announced that Afghanistan will soon be under near universal poverty. What does that mean? It means 98% of the country will be under the poverty line in the coming weeks. So that's an entire country under the poverty line. UNICEF has announced that about 1 million children will die of hunger and malnutrition this winter. So what you saw in the media in 2021 was a political crisis and a political turning point. But what will happen in Afghanistan in 2022 is even worse from a humanitarian, human rights perspective. And to understand how we got here, you obviously had an intervention by Gilles Dorronsoro last week, but I also wanted to reflect on elements of time and space before leaving the floor to my colleagues. First, reflections on time. There are often many questions about what the last 20 years between 2001 and 2021, what these 20 years were actually about. So now we know there were parentheses between two Taliban periods. There were also 20 years of promises made by the international community, and we should use that term very carefully now, because what happened this summer also shows that there wasn't such a thing as the international community. The Americans decided to withdraw and to negotiate with the Taliban, and other countries, including France and the UK, had to live with the consequences of this decision. It was also 20 years of waiting by the Taliban. So the Taliban used time to their advantage. They knew their time would come. So there were, for many, waiting in Pakistan. Many of the Taliban were harbored in Pakistan for the last 20 years. Others were waiting and fighting in Afghanistan. So as I mentioned, between 2001 and 2007, the situation was rather stable. Those were the golden years, as they're often called. But attacks really started happening from 2007 onwards. So Afghans have been at war and living under attack for many, many years, and it's not this summer that changed this. We knew what was coming in August, also because President Biden had set a date. So we knew it was expected. The speed of it was unexpected, but the fall of Kabul was expected. There was an end date when it was announced that for September 11th, 2021, they would retrieve. But now the problem was that this was a calendar-based decision, but not conditions-based. There was no conditionality. So when negotiations happened, there was actually no contingency plan for how would humanitarian organizations continue working under the Taliban? How would development aid go into the country? And right now, one of the biggest constraints we have, but also some of the biggest NGOs have, is how to pay the salary of staff, how to get money in the country, how to continue doing what we do, because now there's a terrorist organization in charge of a government, and the Americans do not, and the entire world. No one recognizes this government, and there are sanctions in place. So it's very hard to even get money in the country. And the Taliban have used time to their advantage. What they've said since August is wait and see. They haven't yet pronounced what their political plan is. They haven't yet even finalized the government. It's a temporary government in place. It's an interim government. So the wait and see rhetoric continues. In the 1990s, they used to say, wait and see for women's rights, it's coming. And now they're saying exactly the same thing. They're saying, wait and see, we are in the process of putting a government in place, but no one has yet seen it. And there's still a lot of internal conflict, we know, between the Taliban movement and the Haqqani network. They're co-sharing the power, and there are a lot of tensions and conflicts between the two. So that's for the element of time. The second is a reflection on space. And the Taliban had a strategy on time. They also had a geographic strategy. Before coming and taking over Kabul on August 15th, they met with the Iranians in Tehran, with the Chinese, with the Indians, with the Russians, with the Pakistanis. They had diplomatic relations with all of the regional governments before closing the borders and slowly coming in to take Kabul. So they made huge territorial gains and took city after city to finally come into Kabul without even firing one single shot to get into the city. And how did that happen? First of all, because I think the Afghans fear them, and it's very hard to describe the fear that people have towards the Taliban, but it's one I felt. The only time I ever felt scared in Afghanistan when I was in a Taliban village, where even children wouldn't smile at me, women wouldn't talk to me, and no one wanted me there because they were just scared for me being in that village. So it's that reign of terror, and the reign of terror that led them to win over an entire city without even a shot. But now what this means for Afghans is that the borders are closed and they're trapped within this country, where, as I mentioned, there's no money coming in, there's no more development aid, girls are not allowed to go to school. So in this situation, what do we do? And so what you saw in August on your TV screens on August 15th is really these elements of time and space colliding, where there was one exit point in a country of 40 million people. The Kabul airport was the only space from which people could legally leave the country. Every other exit point was closed. So imagine one exit point for a country of 40 million people. One international zone. All the embassies had retrieved to Kabul airport this summer. And since then, every embassy has closed, apart from the Iranian, the Pakistani, the Indians, and I think the Russians and the Qataris, so those who are still in the political game. And it became an extraordinary situation in August, similar to, I think, what I've heard of Saigon and other moments in history. So now, how do we stay and deliver in a context like this? And especially if we think about stay and deliver, we have to think about who we're staying and what we have to deliver. And we can't talk about this without talking about women. 80% of those who have been internally displaced in their own country, so who have been forced to leave their homes in Afghanistan since this summer, are women and children. And one of the Human Rights Watch commentators today was saying that the humanitarian crisis is harming first and foremost women. So it's not just a humanitarian crisis, it's a human rights crisis and a women's rights crisis. Also because women are not allowed to work. Many female aid workers can't work. Girls can't go to school beyond grade 6. All of this has a huge mental health toll, but also just a huge toll on women who, for many, were the only income earners in their households, because for months and years before, men had already left. There was COVID, there was insecurity, there was economic downturns. For many reasons, men had already left. And now women are left behind in a country where they have no rights. So think about that when we reflect on staying and delivering. Thinking about the youth who Zabi and I met. We were doing a research in June on migration and development, and youth were telling us that COVID put them out of school, and now the Taliban forced them to fight or to flee, and those are their only two choices. And finally, think about businesses. So a lot of our work related to how to try to support the private sector in Afghanistan as well, how to support an economy. In the last few weeks in Kandahar in the south, which is the stronghold of the Taliban, over 200 factories have closed. In Kabul, where we were doing our research this summer, 60% of factories have closed. So there is no Afghan economy left. So how can people survive, and what is the role of aid in this context? So let me turn to Hervé now to help us reflect on this, and then Jawid will speak, and Zabi.
Bon, bonjour. Alors, bonjour à tous, bonsoir à tous. Et merci à Sciences Po Lille, Pierre et Anne pour cette invitation. Et au-delà de cela, évidemment, pour l'extraordinaire soutien qu'ils ont su afficher dès le premier moment. Ce qui a été le cas de beaucoup de gens, mais peu ont résisté autant, et beaucoup se sont, après quelques semaines, volatilisés. Donc merci à vous tous, et aussi à, je dirais, à l'éthos, de manière générale, de Sciences Po Lille. Alors, moi je suis un ancien prof de philo, donc j'ai à la fois un côté un peu pontifiant, voire donneur de leçons, et en même temps, je dirais, une tendance à voir ce que les événements peuvent dire pour des gens qui apprennent. Alors vous êtes pour la plupart des gens, enfin on est tous des gens qui apprenons, nous sommes tous des gens qui apprenons, mais je me tourne beaucoup vers cette idée qu'au fond, ce qui est important dans l'Afghanistan, personne ne sait ce qui va advenir du pays, c'est ce que ça peut devenir. Et là, je pense que nous ne sommes pas simplement des consommateurs de médias, de livres de politique internationale ou de cours quand on est étudiant, on peut être aussi acteur. Et c'est ce vers quoi je vais essayer d'orienter mon intervention. Alors, l'intervention, on l'a appelée Stay and Deliver. Je vais parler en français parce que j'ai du mal à penser en anglais. J'arrive à écrire en anglais, mais pas à penser. Alors, Stay and Deliver, ça veut dire quoi? Au fond, c'est un livre qui a été écrit par Jan Egeland, qui est le directeur actuel d'NRC. Et ça fait signe de manière assez simple, au fond, vers la mission des ONG et des Nations Unies. À quelles conditions peut-on rester et poursuivre à délivrer de l'aide, de l'assistance, fût-elle humanitaire ou de développement, dans un contexte qui, a priori, ne le permet pas. Alors pourquoi est-ce qu'un contexte peut ne pas permettre de délivrer de l'aide? C'est très simple. Soit parce que les conditions de faisabilité, parce qu'il y a un conflit, soit parce que les conditions éthiques, parce que le gouvernement en place est terroriste, ou parce qu'il exclut, il discrimine une certaine partie de la population, et dans votre action, ça a un impact, ne vous permet pas de délivrer de l'aide. Donc c'est vraiment un dilemme qui est de quel ordre? À la fois pratique, et on va dire éthique pour les organisations. Eh bien, en fait, ce qui est intéressant, c'est que les événements internationaux récents, dont l'Afghanistan, mais on peut étendre cela à la question peut-être du Venezuela, on peut étendre cela avant ça à Haïti, la manière dont l'aide a été gérée à Haïti, nous force à repenser complètement les termes du problème. Stay and Deliver, au fond, ça suggère quoi? Que les ONG, que les agences des Nations Unies sont du côté du bien et qu'elles veulent aider les populations. Quand je suis arrivé en 2008 en Afghanistan, mon rêve, comme je le disais à Anne, un peu contrit il y a exactement 10 minutes, c'était de travailler pour UNDP. Je suis sûr que parmi vous, il y en a qui rêvent de bosser pour des ONG ou pour les Nations Unies. C'est très bien. Mais il faut aussi vous poser la question de votre situation éthique. Le mot éthique, en grec, pas en grec moderne, mais en grec archaïque, ça fait place vers la situation existentielle, où on se situe dans un contexte donné. La position dans cette pièce n'est pas la position géographique ou spatiale, la position par rapport aux autres. Comment vous vous situez en termes de responsabilité par rapport aux autres? Eh bien, la crise en Afghanistan, ça nous en apprend beaucoup sur notre capacité à rester, à délivrer dans un contexte comme cela. Alors, justement, ça nous en apprend beaucoup sur l'éthique. Alors, rester, l'hypothèse première, c'est que stay and deliver, rester, on ne peut pas rester. Et bien, en fait, la réalité d'aujourd'hui montre que c'est l'inverse. Il est plus facile, et aucune ONG contredirait ce que je dis ici, il est plus facile aujourd'hui pour les ONG de rester en Afghanistan et de travailler. Avant, puisque précisément il y avait une situation de conflit entre des insurgents, ou insurgés, les talibans, et le pouvoir en place, plus des milices, plus d'autres acteurs, eh bien vous aviez un risque. Si vous vouliez aller en voiture de Kaboul à Kandahar, c'était impossible virtuellement. Aujourd'hui, c'est possible. Il faut des autorisations, mais c'est possible. Donc on peut penser, et vous avez beaucoup d'articles de journaux qui disent cela, au fond la situation aujourd'hui en Afghanistan elle est plus facile. Entre 1996 et 2001, il était première période des talibans, il était beaucoup plus facile de travailler pour les ONG et pour les agences des Nations Unies. Les gens du Programme alimentaire mondial, le PAM ou WFP, pour les initiés ou pour les anglophones, pouvaient travailler très facilement et aller d'un point A à un point B, pouvaient traverser relativement facilement la ligne Durand qui démarque l'Afghanistan du Pakistan. Problème, et c'est là que c'est aussi très intéressant, à quel prix est-ce qu'on peut rester? en excluant effectivement parmi vos collaborateurs, collaboratrices, 50%, c'est-à-dire les femmes, en faisant des compromis sur l'aide, parce qu'il est possible qu'on vous dise vous pouvez aider les Pashtuns, mais pas les Hazaras. On a de la chance, ils sont tous les deux Pashtuns, on peut les aider. Mais ce que je veux dire, c'est qu'il va y avoir des compromis pour les ONG à faire. Pour les femmes, pour les questions d'ethnie. Je ne dis pas qu'il faut les faire ou pas les faire, c'est pas ce que j'essaie de dire, je suis personne pour dire cela. Mais nous-mêmes, à notre niveau, en tant qu'organisation de recherche, ce sont des questions qu'on doit se poser. Est-ce qu'on peut faire des recherches sur 50% de la population? Ben, les ONG ont le même dilemme. Les agences des Nations Unies ont le même dilemme. Avant, c'était des questions qu'elles ne se posaient pas trop. Aujourd'hui, ce sont des questions qu'elles doivent se poser. Et délivrer maintenant, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire délivrer? Il y a cette idée qu'on ne peut pas délivrer. Eh bien, c'est faux. Au fond, l'accès aujourd'hui, alors qu'il était relativement limité avant, il y avait les go areas et les no-go areas. Aujourd'hui, on peut aller presque partout en théorie. Donc vous voyez qu'en fait, l'idée qui est nécessairement dichotomique et dont on a besoin pour penser que d'un côté vous avez un régime qui est les talibans et de l'autre côté les do-gooders, les ONG, les UN qui essaient d'aider, n'est pas si simple. Je ne suis pas du tout en train d'exonérer de quelque manière que ce soit les talibans, loin de là. Mais en revanche, je questionne beaucoup plus le rôle des ONG, des agences des Nations Unies, et la question des Nations Unies, la question Stay and Deliver est assez bonne parce qu'au fond, il s'agit de se poser la question, à quel prix pouvons-nous rester? Sous quelles conditions éthiques pouvons-nous continuer? Et maintenant, je vais expliquer qu'en fait, il ne s'agit pas simplement de continuer, mais de commencer à aider les populations afghanes. Alors, pourquoi commencer? Parce que les 20 dernières années, j'imagine que Gilles a dû vous en parler aussi, les 20 dernières années ont aussi montré les limites de beaucoup d'agences des Nations Unies et de beaucoup d'ONG. En Afghanistan, quand je suis arrivé, j'avais des yeux émerveillés. Je suis allé voir beaucoup d'ONG. Je ne vais pas les nommer, on va dire Save the Children. Save the Children à Kaboul, c'est magnifique. Vous avez une petite boutique avec 2 vieilles femmes afghanes, 2 étudiants qui viennent de l'Arkansas. Vous avez envie de les embrasser sur le front, c'est très beau. Puis vous allez à Mazar-e-Sharif et là vous voyez 4 buildings vides parce qu'il faut brûler l'argent et parce que l'argent qu'on reçoit des bailleurs, l'argent qu'on reçoit des généreux donateurs individuels, donateurs, ben on ne sait pas quoi en faire. Donc, par manque de stratégie parfois, par incompréhension du contexte. Donc vous avez vraiment, pour beaucoup d'ONG, à part quelques-unes, et aussi pour beaucoup d'agences des Nations Unies, un vrai questionnement sur le fait que, fondamentalement aujourd'hui, la plupart d'entre elles, quel que soit le pays, et c'est une grande leçon de l'Afghanistan, se comportent comme des boîtes privées mues par une logique néolibérale. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire, boîte privée mue par une logique néolibérale? Ça veut dire qu'elles considèrent, avant de considérer leur mandat, que l'Afghanistan, comme Haïti, comme n'importe quel autre pays, c'est un gâteau. Oxfam va avoir sa part, un peu plus grosse que celle de Save the Children, un peu plus grosse que celle de Acted, un peu plus grosse que... Et c'est comme ça. Donc ce sont finalement, et c'est ce qu'on voit dans tous les pays où opèrent les ONG, elles ont une logique de boîte privée tout en ayant un mandat humanitaire, développement et le discours qui va avec, et le site web qui va avec. Mais cela requiert, et la crise afghane l'a montré, une remise en cause et une autocritique fondamentale de leur mode de fonctionnement. On ne peut plus fonctionner comme cela. Et les populations ne sont pas dupes. Nassim Majidi, quand on est arrivé en 2008 à un moment de queue de comète où on sentait déjà que les choses allaient mal, si vous parlez aux gens qui ont connu l'Afghanistan à peu près en continu entre 2000 et 2020, ils vous diront que depuis 2003, les Afghans savaient que ça n'allait pas, ça ne pouvait pas marcher. Parce que les fondamentaux n'étaient pas là. Qu'est-ce qui a soutenu l'Afghanistan pendant 20 ans? Eh bien, c'est pas très compliqué. 3 000 milliards de dollars. Ça fait beaucoup de milliards quand vous savez que, à dollars constants, le plan Marshall, qui a permis d'autoriser des dettes pour la reconstruction de l'Europe, en particulier à la France et à l'Allemagne, a coûté combien? Vous avez un chiffre? 145. 145 milliards, ça c'est pour relancer l'économie française et allemande. 3 000 milliards, c'est l'Afghanistan sur 20 ans. Si à cela vous ajoutez les pensions des soldats morts et blessés aux États-Unis, vous arrivez à 8 000 milliards de dollars. Donc c'est une guerre qui coûte 8 000 milliards de dollars. C'est un chiffre que vous ne pouvez pas vous représenter en une vie, mais c'est surtout un chiffre qui montre quoi? Que c'est artificiellement qu'on a soutenu sous perfusion, encore une fois, un régime politique qui fonctionnait avec les mauvais fondamentaux. Et dans ce jeu-là, derrière la question stay and deliver, comment est-ce qu'on va pouvoir continuer à faire notre boulot en tant qu'ONG aux Nations Unies, eh bien, en fait, il faut repartir à la base et se dire comment est-ce qu'on va pouvoir enfin commencer à le faire. Parce que ce que je soutiens, c'est que ces organisations font partie du problème. Elles font complètement partie du problème, elles ne sont pas là pour le résoudre. Alors, très rapidement, et je veux surtout laisser la place à Jawid et Zabi, éventuellement à vos questions, je dirais simplement, je fais exprès d'ici d'avoir un... Enfin, je fais exprès, mais c'est ce que je pense, d'ajouter un peu un caractère provoquant à ces questions, mais je pense qu'il y a des enjeux pour vous, en tant qu'étudiants et en tant que citoyennes et citoyens. C'est un côté appel de Lille. Je regardais, récemment, il y avait Jacques Rancière et Étienne Balibar qui ont parlé. Vous avez de la chance à Lille, il y a plein de choses bien qui se passent. Cité Philo, et Étienne Balibar parlait de l'appel de Lille. Si vous n'avez pas vu ça, je vous conseille de le voir, c'est disponible en ligne. Eh bien, on va lancer l'appel de Lille. Il y a un appel de Lille qui peut être fait individuellement. Cet appel de Lille pourrait consister à se dire, plutôt que penser ce que je viens de dire, la chute de l'Afghanistan était irréversible, c'était annoncé, on l'avait toujours vu. On peut se dire qu'effectivement, le diagnostic n'est pas mauvais. Toutes les organisations ont fait 20 stratégies d'un an. Les Américains, les Européens. Si vous regardez les stratégies même des ONG, c'est risible. Il n'y a absolument aucune visibilité. Des organisations comme UNDP, s'il y avait, je ne sais pas, s'il y avait un peu d'accountability sur des organisations comme ça, et s'il y avait des responsabilités effectivement par rapport à l'argent dépensé aux résultats, il y aurait vraiment des gros problèmes. Pour autant, était-ce annoncé? Et vous, en tant que, encore une fois, en tant qu'acteur de tout cela, parce que vous n'êtes pas simplement spectateur, vous ne pouvez pas l'être, ou alors il faut pas être à Sciences Po, vous devez vous poser la question, quel peut être mon rôle? Et votre rôle est très important. Vous êtes là pour justement questionner et critiquer. Et à mon sens, il faut sortir du discours qu'on entend trop souvent, que ce soit en politique internationale ou même dans le domaine du journalisme, sur les conséquences étaient attendues et ça ne pouvait pas se passer autrement. Ça, c'est précisément ce qu'on peut critiquer, et ce que je critique très souvent, c'est, on va dire, le squelette de toute logique néolibérale. C'est l'idée que « there is no alternative ». Je cite les grands auteurs, Margaret Thatcher. Il y a toujours une alternative. Sur l'Afghanistan, certes, il y a eu 20 ans de stratégie défectueuse, parmi les ONG, les agences des Nations Unies, les bailleurs, certes, mais chaque année, jusqu'à environ 2014-2015, il y avait une chance pour faire autre chose. Et ça s'applique à beaucoup de pays, y compris au nôtre. Enfin, au vôtre, si vous êtes français. Donc, je pense qu'il y a toujours une alternative, un chemin alternatif, ou un terme alternatif, et qu'il ne faut jamais être simplement l'esclave d'une logique complètement linéaire et sans possibilité autre. C'est ce que, pour moi, l'Afghanistan, après 12 ans là-bas et 7 ans de présence sur le terrain, m'a enseigné. C'est-à-dire qu'il ne faut pas tomber dans une espèce de factalisme où on a une logique d'obéissance aveugle aux faits et à ce qu'ils semblent dicter. Et dans le cas des ONG et des agences UN, ça veut dire deux choses, et c'est là que vous pouvez intervenir. Le premier, c'est qu'ils doivent revenir à leurs principes. Quels sont ces principes? Opérer selon le droit, selon leur mandat, dans un contexte qui sera celui de la vengeance, puisque ceux qui ont perdu le pouvoir pendant 20 ans veulent se venger. Ça signifie beaucoup de choses. Ils vont se venger contre ceux qui ont eu le pouvoir, ils vont se venger contre les femmes, ils vont se venger contre l'éducation, parce que l'éducation, c'est le symbole, c'est un des rares symboles de la réussite ces 20 dernières années. Donc dans un contexte de vengeance, dans un contexte, encore une fois, il faut toujours y insister, où 50% de la population est de fait exclue. Et les femmes afghanes pourraient, en bonne logique, toutes obtenir un statut de réfugié prima facie. Et enfin, dans un contexte où la question de la neutralité et de l'éthique, pour toutes ces organisations, et là je m'empresse de dire y compris la nôtre, puisque nous faisons aussi partie du problème, je n'ai pas le point de vue de Sirius, je fais partie du problème, j'en ai bien conscience, la question de la neutralité se pose aussi. Donc, vengeance, contexte de grand questionnement sur le genre, et le genre, c'est pas les femmes, enfin ça vous le savez j'espère, mais le genre, c'est pas les femmes, c'est vraiment la construction sociale et la réflexion autour des statuts de féminité, de masculinité. Comment, dans cette société, on peut opérer, penser avec cela. Et enfin, la troisième chose, c'est la neutralité politique.
Et vous, justement, vous faites partie de l'autre volet des solutions, celui de l'autocritique. Vous devez forcer les ONG à faire leur autocritique. Vous devez forcer vos gouvernements à faire leur autocritique. Nous sommes dans un amphithéâtre qui s'appelle Hannah Arendt. Vous savez sûrement que Hannah Arendt enfin, je pense que vous connaissez tous et toutes, si ce n'est pas le cas, c'est pas grave. Moi, je l'ai découvert très tard, 25 ans. Trop tard, c'est pas si tard. C'est pas mal. Moi, je continue à la lire, j'aime bien. Et Hannah Arendt est une penseuse exceptionnelle, a pour moi en particulier un titre. Très souvent, quand vous lisez un bouquin ou un texte, vous savez ce qui va être dit la phrase d'après. Avec elle, c'est jamais le cas. Hannah Arendt a écrit un très très beau texte qui est dans un volume qui s'appelle, je crois, Jugé de mémoire, mais je suis pas très sûr, qui parle des oasis. Les oasis, ce sont des espaces et des temps, et ça revient à ce que disait Nassim, ce sont des espaces et des temps où l'action politique est possible. Tout le temps, vous entendrez chez vos parents, peut-être chez vos profs, dans les médias, vous entendrez partout, il n'y a pas d'autre alternative. Mais les oasis, c'est justement ces endroits où on se dit que collectivement ou individuellement, la politique est possible. Il n'y a pas d'autre politique qu'une politique possible. Donc pensez peut-être en ces termes. Moi, ce que m'a appris l'Afghanistan, c'est que oui, c'est un désastre, oui, c'est une débâcle, mais peut-être qu'une politique est possible. Peut-être que si on s'appuie sur certains principes, les ONG en Afghanistan vont peut-être enfin commencer à faire leur boulot. Je mets beaucoup de peut-être, mais la conditionnalité est de rigueur. Et je finirai simplement en disant que pour moi, le mandat de ces organisations commence demain. Pendant 20 ans, c'était simplement des boîtes privées mues par peu de mandats, peu de direction, peu de stratégie, qui ont échoué comme l'ensemble des acteurs présents sur place. Je vous remercie. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hello again. This is Jawid Hassanzai. I am an Afghan, and I was recently evacuated, as Nassim mentioned, following the collapse of the country to France. And luckily, my asylum case was approved, and I got a positive news that my asylum case is approved, and I'm a formal refugee now. So, thanks also to the management of Sciences Po Lille for facilitating this conference and giving us this opportunity to share our experiences with you. I have more than 11 years of working experience in Afghanistan, and challenging environments, working with the government, the public sector, with international organizations, and the private sector. Been traveling like in Afghanistan to most of the countries, collecting data, doing research. So today I would like to share my thoughts about the perception of communities about the Taliban. So I would like to tell you about like how we can divide the Taliban into pre and post takeover. We can look at the 9/11 attacked when it happened, and the Taliban actually thrown away by the US, and after that they gradually they disappeared for a while. Like as Nassim mentioned, the conflicts intensified in 2007, and that was the time when in 2012 the transition period started and the withdrawal of the international troops started. And after that, Taliban really reinforced and started to strengthen their structures. They had a parallel structure with the Afghan government. For For instance, if there is a provincial governor in one province, Taliban had their own provincial governor. If they had district representatives, Taliban also had district representatives. So for every single sector, for example, the education sector, the health sector, the extractives, industry sector, transport, telecommunication, for every single sector, Taliban had their own responsible person. And of course, they were reporting back to their leaders in Quetta or Pakistan. So how I know this? One, that I'm an Afghan. Second, that I grew up in a village in a rural area. And third, I was detained by the Taliban. It was back in 2012 when I was visiting my village. I was living in Kabul, the provincial and the capital of Afghanistan, but I was visiting my village, my parents, and that time I was working for the USAID funded project, and it was about the child and mother support. And the Taliban came, the commander asked me to present myself there in a mosque where more Taliban were there surrounding, and they were questioning me, why you're working for the foreigners. I said that I work for a humanitarian sector, which is the health. This program supports mother and children. It is very essential sector, and I'm not working with the military. I'm not working with the police, the army that you are in conflict with. But they said, no, every foreign organization is not allowed that you should be working. Also, you cannot work with the government. So after that, when I shared my story that I work with this sector and this is my job, and the commander said that I can quote them directly here, that you're eligible to be killed by working with foreigners. And it was harsh for me, so I asked, like, what should I do now? Because I work, like, they said, you have one way. You quit your job, you no longer work with the NGOs, the foreigners, and the government. So I spent 3 days in their prison. They didn't have prison actually like a facility, but the prison was more open space, like one mosque during night and second mosque the other night, and during the day it was more about public spaces, gardens, one gardens, another public space in a desert. So we were moving from place to place. And finally, the community leaders intervened, and they guaranteed that Jawid will be no longer working with the foreigners and the government. After that commitment in written to a commission, I was released. So I know that the Taliban, how strong were they at back 2012. Like they had a commission, they had a very a strong legal system. For instance, in a village where there is a conflict, legal issues, people were referring to the Taliban court because that was very rapid and easy to solve problems, because the government had issue in their legal system, especially in the remote areas. So it was more about mixed feelings about the Taliban, because that was the community, the rural community, and also the urban communities. The rural community where there were more madrasas, like the religious studies center, and more in comparison to the cities, and the people from the rural area were liking the Taliban. There are evidence that they were providing with food support, with places to hide, and but there are also evidence that people were forced to provide food items and also place to hide. So, like both issues from both angles we could see, but more in general, the community people were in favor of the Taliban in comparison to the people who live in the cities, because in the city, people were educated, people had access to more literacy, and they were not the same minded, the same ideology as the Taliban. And one of the facts that why Taliban increased and intensified during the past decade was the inappropriate behavior of the coalition forces, as many people ended up in prison for suspicion of connection to the Al-Qaeda or the Taliban based on a little information, intelligence. And apart from that, most night raids operations were culturally counterproductive. Like suppose during a night landing helicopters behind people's houses, detonating their front doors and with explosive, and then followed by heavily armed men entering to a house that is full of children and women, resulting even in killing of civilians. So also NATO airstrike were mistakenly resulted in killing civilians. For instance, bombarding wedding ceremonies mistaken to a Taliban gathering, and bombarding hospitals by suspicion that Taliban are there. So all these resulted that people were thinking that the NATO and the Afghan forces killing them deliberately. And that's why many people who became Taliban were general public, who became insurgent after their brother got killed innocently. And many, it was more about revenge kind of thing rather than really the mentality of being a Talib. So that was the feeling before the takeover. But coming after the takeover, like 4 months ago, most of the people think that the takeover was unexpectedly. It was beyond expectation, because people were hopeful for the positive outcome of the peace talks. The peace talks were going on for the last 2-3 years since 2018, and people were thinking that there will be an exclusive government, there will be a transition period, but it was all happened so quickly. But now people are happy for the government that is a single government, like ruling the country. There is not a strong opposition to fight against. The main part of the happiness is that the rate of violence has decreased remarkably. On average, 300 people were being killed in the clashes from both sides, the Taliban and the National Army, the civilians. And this big rate of casualty has stopped. That was the big part of the happiness. But on the other hand, life has been stalled in Afghanistan. There is acute hunger, poverty. There is no economic activities. There is higher unemployment rate. And the prices for food items gone like considerably high, and the currency has actually the currency has actually inflated. And youths are feeling backwarded, and they think that we are away from science, technology, and development. So the country is faced with brain drain and human capital flight. People still have the fear of extrajudicial killings, and they don't get their rights, and they don't have access to basic services, including banking sector, which is a crisis now in Afghanistan. And more importantly, Taliban have not fulfilled their promises for having an inclusive government. And people, like the majority, think that we are excluded. Now I would like to talk about perception of communities about the NGOs, as Hervé mentioned, Stay and Deliver. NGOs have played a major role in providing services, especially in the remote and insecure part of the country. In those parts that the government was unable to provide access, to provide services, and started from early 2000, NGOs were regarded as the main provider for the humanitarian services in terms of health, education, and support to refugees and internally displaced people. But we can divide the NGOs into small versus large scale, and also to national and international organizations. Where small scale NGOs had a small lifespan in comparison to the large scale NGOs. And they were more focused on the topic of research, democracy, capacity building, fights for women rights, and it was more that the Taliban were against this kind of mentality. Where, on the other hand, the UN organization and the INGO, or the international organization, they have actually proven their capabilities in providing crucial support in the emergency front, and also in the humanitarian aid and development front in the past 2 decades. Meanwhile, the services are vital in responding to the humanitarian crisis, and especially for the vulnerable populations. There were some issue with the NGOs that one, operation costs. The operation cost of the NGO was high, given that the security challenges that we had in Afghanistan, given that most of the contracts were subcontracting to other partner organizations. But in the reports were mentioning between 5 to 20 to 19% of the overhead cost. But in most instances, it goes beyond that because of the staff salaries, because of the facilities in other costs. Yeah, exactly, 70 and 80. For example, you have $1 aid support, and 70 cents is spent in the operation costs. Other challenge was the NGO was that they were working solely, not coordinating with the line ministries. For example, they were writing proposal by their own, submitting concept note by their own, and receiving funds from the international donors, and not sharing this with the line ministry, for example, where the priority lies, what should the priorities that I should contribute and focus on. And this actually led to unbalanced service support in most of the provinces, and they were not actually focused on the poverty reduction and job creations or balanced development. But recently, it's worth mentioning that in the last 5 years, the government took actions to avoid this by committing to national priority programs, the NPPs. Ask the NGOs that you should work with your line ministries that to focus on what your priority is to actually achieve the sustainable development goals, which is very important for Afghanistan. So just concluding that what evolution did I see so far and how the service delivery will be in 2022 and like next year and beyond. So most of the NGO services stopped after the takeover, and large-scale migration happened, and the situation got worse. And it will stay negative until the Taliban get legitimacy. As we are not in the transition period, we are rather in a sliding period to the negative side. So the service delivery won't be back to normal fully in the next year because what we consider as a need is not a need for the Taliban because we have different mentalities, different needs maybe for Taliban and the general public. Because recently I can mention the head of ministers of the Taliban. He said that we are not responsible for food needs of the people, for the hunger of the people. The people should rather ask their gods. So this message actually tells us a lot, like how the governance of the Taliban would be, or it is. And besides that, I think the limited in 2022, limited services will be there, but not full. And as most of the experienced staff of the NGOs evacuated abroad, and it would be difficult for the Taliban to resume, especially the development activities. And I think the Taliban would seek legitimized ways to having power, either asking for loya jirga or composing an interim government through the elections. But they won't last long if they don't bring positive changes. So again, like we still need to fight against hunger. We need to they need to provide access to services and economic development. And people won't be patient anymore. They will wait a bit more, but finally they will resist, and they need actually the government to respond. Thank you.
تشکر جاوید جان. Thank you, Nassim, Hervé, Jawid, and thanks to Sciences Po, and thank you for coming to the seminars today. My colleagues, they covered many of the topics. I also covered maybe some of my topics also similar to them. But my reflection, my name is, first of all, I have to, introduce myself. My name is Zabihullah Barakzai. I'm the deputy country representative for Samuel Hall, and I've been working for research for past 10 years in Afghanistan. I was in charge of the government relations, administration, and the security and safety of the organization in Afghanistan. Yeah, Afghanistan has a very complex and a very, a big history of this civil war that, even we have here. I would like to, discuss my, reflection. It has a lot of very complexity even with those reflections that we have said. And it has been like a, in Afghanistan we say Afghans خدا از روز بدتر نجات بده از یوم البتر. God save us from the yom al-batar means worst day. Unfortunately, their prayer has not been accepted by God yet. You know, it's the prayer that every Afghan, like for the past 40 years, they are saying. Now, I will, my discussion will be on the Karzai government, Ashraf Ghani government, and also Taliban. That here also the point that I will be mentioning is that the leading to what happened right now in Afghanistan, resulted to the collapse of Afghanistan. Yeah, Karzai government after we know that it's very familiar topic, Bonn Agreement and the 9/11, things that in many research papers or once you write them on the internet, you can find them a lot about these things. Yeah, and this person has from the beginning of the the government has been there and the service for 13 to 14 years, like a king, has been there. At the beginning when he came there, so the government, there was a lot of hype, funding, a lot of money coming in Afghanistan, so everyone was very happy. And this led to, the happiness of the people as well, and the development of the many sectors like education and business. Lots of business. There were, there were many U.S. contractors, and there were developments especially to the roads, connections to roads. For example, from my province, Farah or Nimrod, which is about like 1,200 kilometers, you should have traveled for 2-3 days to reach to Kabul, and now you can reach within between 12 hours with the bus. So it was a huge improvements. But similarly with communication, there have been lots of communication like telecoms, they were there. Education also developed, but the issue was education developed, but there were a lot of low quality education also, like many people so it was the result of at the beginning as well. And the main reason that happened was that this person was very famous for his hishtandari in promoting the nepotism in Afghanistan. So he sacrificed the rules, the procedure and everything for the sake of a friendship. And everyone would come to him and say, okay, we know it, we are from Kandahar, and from this one we know in America each other. So, and he could secure a cabinet or a high position in the government. And he also was not a good leader, so he promoted this and made political leaders because of not their capacities, but because of their religion, regions, tribe, and these things happen. And further to that, what he did actually, and he's also accused of, by the Afghan people, that he promoted these warlords, to become which later on, led to many corruptions. The biggest, corruption that in Afghanistan happened is that, one of the biggest, thing was the bankruptcy of the Kabul Bank. That even the family of the Karzai and the Marshal Fahim, the deputy of Massoud, you might know, he was right. So, and the leader. So his brothers, Mahmoud Karzai and the brothers of the Marshal Fahim were involved in these things, that in the bankruptcy and the fraudulent of the scandal of this bank, which even this bank was distributing the salaries of government, which funded by the U.S. taxpayers, about 1 million worth of the salaries were distributing from this bank. Yeah, many projects are implemented, but actually, these projects was useless. Even there are many reports that you can documented by SIGAR as well, the special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. So you can read about that. There are many of these. For example, they made streams or a school, but it was not, inequality or even there are some reports that, about these things that even a school were not there and it's just built, the money, someone got it and it went. Among these mistakes, one of the also mistakes that they started from the Karzai government and later on to even Ashraf Ghani government was that Jawid also reflected one of them. I mean, about the communities, arresting people, bombing people. Some people, because of a personal conflict, who had a power, they were arrested by the India's National Director of the Security. Without anything, because the guy had even a hunting gun at home. And what happened actually, this guy was not like a Talib or a terrorist. Later on, he became like a Talib because to take a revenge against the other guy. And this thing become, now it become these cases that happen become an example for the terrorist groups to use them in their campaigns. That, okay, look at these people, they are, innocent people are killing, and the Muslims they are killing. And this was one of the issues. Even many people were released by the corruptions. The person killed many people or being a terrorist, even by paying money to the courts were released. So these were the problems. Ashraf Ghani, yeah. However, he, the formation of his, his government also accused, accused by people because of, corruption in the elections. So here it was the time, even before that, democracy and constitutional law. So everything by Karzai and, even by the government, Ashraf Ghani was violated and everything, so the trust gone. At the beginning, because Ashraf Ghani was academics, person who wrote the books, how to rebuild the, failed states, and everyone saying he's a savior for the Afghanistan, and let's vote for him, let's promote him, and he's like that. But unfortunately, the speech of the Afghans were failed, and they did not receive what they were thinking. And so yes, he among all of what he also did, he did some. There were more developments. They were okay. He tried work on that. However, there were shortcoming on the funding from the U.S. on water management, business, rebuilding historical places like Darlaman Palace, more opportunity for youth and the women in the political to become political leaders. However, even these, more opportunity they were, by youth, but at the end his decisions were, he was influenced by the political leaders. That he could not hire, assign people with the capacity. At the end, it led to the corruption, and which later on, because he was thinking that promoting youth, he, he said that, told his close friends that, okay, he promoted kindergarten instead of the, I'm coming to the collapse reason. So all of these things that into the corruptions that, these political leaders and these things, so of course they were the reason for that. But, it was the time that for U.S., it didn't, that it wanted to continue, didn't want to continue a presidency in Afghanistan because of this expensive war. And the, killing of the bin Laden was also a reason to calculate, to sum up the measure and go back. However, the discussion started in 2010 by, even, the ADI started in 2010 by Barack Obama, and they speeded it up by the great Trumps, and then finalized it by the Joe Biden. So And this thing, so coming to idea of what happened actually when they, the Doha agreement, lack of the trust of the, Afghan national army on the government because it was corrupt and they had there were shortcomings from them, and that it led to impacted the morale of the national army, which it paved the way for the collapse. From other side, Taliban got more morals, and that also they had their religious morals as well, and more unity as well. So they speeded up the things, and that they got the Afghanistan. Coming to the Taliban government, yes, of course, nowadays there are problems, but now there is no problem with traveling across the geography of Afghanistan. Easily you can go, but there is less corruption compared to the previous governments for the moment. But we are not sure what happens later on. Problems that they have is the lack of capacity for governance. Of course, you are not expecting the guerrilla warriors to that never been educated or have they do not know of the principle of governance to lead these institutions. So there shouldn't be any expectation of these people. And even NGOs have had trouble with these people because they are not able to were not aware of the principle of these NGOs and what they have to do. And however, they are claiming because of their capacity for religion or all of this. Even they have problem at the courts. They had discussions with some lawyers in Afghanistan. They were saying that their people, they have some of them have the knowledge, but they do not have the capacity for judicial. And there are problems. People they do not know. They do not know what to do, which law to use. For example, from Islamic perspective, there are some problems. There is no institution. Some of the institutions are not there that to respond to the needs of and the requirement of the people. So this is it's a big challenge for the people. Let me give you a very live example. We gave a power of attorney in Afghanistan to some people at the court, and it's still no one could process get the documents. Of course, now the sanction is also another problem which brought a lot of economical problems to the families, and it's impacted. I think, in my perspective, more than Taliban, it's impacted the Afghan poor Afghan people, and also because of that, on a daily basis, thousands of people are irregularly passing crossing the border to Iran or other countries. Solution. So solution is that that of course it happened because of the failed the negotiation with the U.S. So they have the EU and the Americans. So I think they have to keep them accountable that they maintain the achievement for the past 20 years, such as women's rights to education and work and others. When Taliban is saying that they are not treated to other countries, so a strong guarantee to be taken from them. And the neighboring countries, such as, especially those are that allies or friends of these Talibans, like Pakistan, China, Russia, and so on, now somehow Iran as well. So they need to, Qatar, they need to come and bring, guarantee these people and to be some improvement happen. One step from the European Union, they have thinking to open, their embassies under one umbrella, but not, recognizing them. I think it's a very good positive things. As we are saying in it, there is saying you cannot send a kiss with a courier. So it's better that you are there and you talk with them and keep them accountable if they are saying that, to recognize them later on and everything. And as mentioned before, so we election and democracy. So of course, Taliban might, commit to some rights, women rights on the education later on. But for election, I don't think for the moment it's feasible. They accept it because not only because the democracy, the name of the reputation of the democracy by the previous government is even within people is lost. So it's damaged by the previous government. And even, for example, neither the communities they want, for example, these national assemblies and parliaments, because these people were corrupt and they were going to the national assemblies and due to these elections, and they were cruel on the people at the end. And if there is no these actions to be taken by the EU and things, so I think there is more will be a rate of ISIS, and then these resistant groups will improve and will lead to another civil war. And finally, I would like to say to I hope this peace negotiation, everything should have been done in like 20 years ago, when there was a bone and discussion that they were brought to the negotiation tables. Thank you so much.
Juste très rapidement, avant qu'on passe peut-être à certaines questions s'il y en a, je veux juste dire que dans les interventions de Zabi et Jawid, alors, certains points, effectivement, peuvent paraître obscurs parce qu'on fait référence aux accords de Bonn, on fait référence à des choses, aux accords de Doha que vous ne connaissez pas nécessairement. Mais de manière générale, ce qu'on peut garder, c'est plusieurs choses. D'une part, post-2001, il y a un immense espoir qui a été généré auprès de la population. Et ça, c'est l'espoir qu'on génère suite à la chute d'un régime qui avait conduit à affamer la population, puisque c'était déjà le cas en 2001. Mais il faut savoir continuer à répondre après cela. Et c'est ce qui n'a pas été fait. Par exemple, Zabi a très bien montré que les gouvernements successifs qui ont été mis en place par l'élection, par la voie électorale et démocratique, mais en fait qui ont été nommés par les agences des Nations Unies et par le gouvernement américain, depuis Washington, n'ont pas répondu aux attentes. Et les termes qu'ils ont employés ne sont pas des termes qui sont uniquement leur point de vue d'Afghans. Ce sont vraiment des termes qui sont maintenant reconnus. Les deux présidents successifs, Hamid Karzai et donc Ashraf Ghani, se sont rendus coupables de népotisme, de corruption, de différents, qui vaudraient effectivement de passer devant un tribunal. Donc cette atmosphère de corruption et de népotisme, malgré certaines réussites qu'on a pu mentionner dans l'éducation, fait qu'effectivement, face aux espoirs immenses qui ont été générés, eh bien, il n'y a pas eu de réponse en face. Et je pense que le deuxième point sur lequel je voulais insister, après avoir insisté sur l'intervention de Zabi, c'est celle de Jawid. Jawid a mentionné un point extraordinaire qui vaut, je pense, les déclarations de, je crois que c'est Goebbels quand il dit « Quand j'entends le mot culture, je sors mon pistolet ». Quand Akhundzada dit « Nous ne sommes pas, en tant que gouvernement, responsables de la situation humanitaire ou de la famine », je ne sais plus quels étaient ces mots, eh ben, c'est clairement une démission. Et ils disent « Les gens peuvent s'en remettre à leur Dieu ». Alors là, la religion revient opportunément. Mais ce qui est très intéressant ici, c'est quoi? C'est que si la science économique sur les révolutions nous enseigne une chose, c'est que très souvent, les révolutions, à commencer par la révolution française, commencent quand le prix du blé ou la famine atteint un niveau inacceptable. Et donc c'est là, pour en revenir, on se dit, mais il va où? Pour en revenir à notre sujet qui est Stay and Deliver, l'opportunité pour les ONG, pour les bailleurs, pour les agences des Nations Unies, de finalement continuer leur travail. Et leur travail, il n'est ni pour les talibans, ni pour les gouvernements, il est pour les gens, il ne faut pas l'oublier, for the people. Eh bien, ce travail-là peut être rendu possible par le fait, justement, que, contrairement à ce que dit Akhundzada, un gouvernement est responsable, ultimement. Pourquoi? Ben pour le fait que les gens puissent manger. C'est la première chose. C'est aussi bête que ça. parce que sinon ils se révoltent. Donc s'ils veulent conserver un semblant de stabilité dans un contexte qui n'est pas simple, l'Afghanistan est isolé, ils ont des conflits internes, on n'a pas beaucoup insisté dessus, mais il y a toujours l'État islamique, il y a une guerre des chefs au sein des talibans. Leur seule chance, c'est d'avoir des acteurs, des alliés qui leur permettent de simplement mettre un chapeau sur la révolte. Après, il sera toujours temps de parler d'amélioration du régime, peut-être de changement du régime, parce qu'on ne peut pas gouverner contre un peuple très longtemps.
Alors, si vous avez des questions en français ou en anglais, comme vous préférez.
Good evening. First of all, thank you for your intervention and your testimony tonight. I apologize for my English. I try to do my best. I have a question. Half of the population lost their fundamental rights. Why? Can you give us your point of view, or can you explain why women are considered a real threat for the Talibans? Why?
They're trying to see who should
Okay,
answer first.
okay. It's a tough question, of course. I don't think the woman will be, you know, a treat for them. But it's you know, by their ideology, they are going, you know, they are implementing these rules and other things. And their ideology is extremist. And, you know, even there, you know, if they want to talk about Islam has been, you know, there were many women, they were, you know, leaders in the history of Islam. From the Prophet Muhammad's, you know, wife, you know, she was helping him with businesses. She was also her advisor. So she had a role. And if you know, I mean, there are many hadiths, you know, even by the wife of, you know, Prophet Muhammad, you know, by the wife of Hazrat Ali, Fatima, were saying. So how they could have, you know, said these things if they were, you know, they didn't have, you know, active role in that time. So it's extremist things, and it's not Islamist. It has for them how it's a treat. They do not want women, you know, to lead. So this is their.
But the question is why.
Maybe on the why, yeah, on the why we can maybe answer briefly, because I would like to have as many questions as possible. First, it's true that the distinction between Islam and, for instance, other traditional cultures, including when we consider the Chadri, must be done. For instance, we did a study in 2013 on women's access to justice. So we visited prisons and interviewed 2,000 women in prisons. A woman in prison in Afghanistan is a woman who has been raped, basically. And the only way for her to survive is to go to prison, to go to jail, because she knows that she will not be attacked anymore by the husband or the family-in-law. One thing we noticed is that for many women at that time, the Taliban courts, so Jawid mentioned that you had actually the actual government, and you also had, per province, per district, in most cases, a shadow government, which means people with the same type of positions making decisions in general more efficiently, more quickly for the population. It was a way for the Taliban to capture the population. Taliban courts were very often more in favor of women sometimes than official courts or the official code of the Pashtunwali. Why so? Because Talibans understood that if you want to conquer a community, you need to focus on women. What do women represent in Afghanistan? Very often, is the center of the household. Financial, in terms of finance, in terms of decision-making processes, in terms of tensions as well. Because where do tensions come from? Not from women, but from the relationship between the mother and a mother-in-law. These tensions are everything. It's been documented anthropologically. So what I'm saying is that if you want to put
an entire community under silence, you silence women, not men. Politically, sociologically, it's very smart. If you want to control the community, you control women. Men will execute, women will have control over the way things are perceived, the way money is spent, the way it's allocated to different items. So basically, it is true that it has an ideological component, to a certain extent also religious component, but first and foremost, it's a political smart decision, which shows that our national philosopher BHL was not that smart when he thought that Talibans were just venue-es on motorcycles. It's a French joke, it's okay. Other questions?
Good evening. I had a question. Well, thank you very much for your intervention first. You said that the Taliban was ready to welcome researchers, and you said that they were because they feel lost. Can you develop about it, please?
So the spokesperson of the Taliban just a few weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, they gave their first long interview to an Afghan journalist, and you can find it on YouTube, to Tolo News. And basically they said that they themselves hadn't expected to win so fast. No one, so including them, didn't expect August 15th to go as it did. And so what he was explaining was that they were not prepared to govern and that they're still not prepared to govern. He was explaining that they don't even have a full government yet, that they don't have a permanent government as of yet. So what I was telling you about the wait and see is, in some part it's a strategy, but in some part it's also not a strategy. It's just they themselves cannot govern and they know it. In the same interview, the journalist asked the spokesperson, why do you promise all these rights in theory, but your people on the ground, kill people arbitrarily, attack people who are dressed in Western clothes? Why is there this disconnect? And he said, we didn't even have time to properly train our new fighters, our new troops, our new low-level commanders. So in a way, they found themselves winning over an entire territory. The last time that they ruled, the population was about 20 million people. Now it's 38 million people. So they find themselves in front of a population that's demographically larger, also mostly youth, and people who've benefited from education, all the progresses that they were mentioning. And so they find themselves at a point, and now they publicly stated that they're not capable of governing. The other thing that they state very clearly is that they don't have the money to govern. So as you were saying, the Afghan government and the Afghan services have been run by the World Bank, by international organizations for 20 years. The entire health sector in Afghanistan was paid for by the World Bank. All of the teacher salaries in the education sector was paid for by the World Bank, which means without international money, without this money, they can't govern. So what they tell us now when we go to them, and we're not meeting with them one-on-one, we're part of different coordination meetings where NGOs meet with the government once a week. So we go to coordination meetings, we meet with them, and basically what they're telling us now is get attention to Afghanistan, go out and get whatever information you need, get the data, and try to convince basically the world to continue funding, because we don't have any money and we basically don't know what to do. Now the ethical question Hervé was underlining is how to do that when most foreign governments now, for example, the French government has pledged 100 million euros. That money is going into pure humanitarian work, meaning it can only go into food provision, it can only go into basic survival needs that the Afghan population has. It won't go into paying teacher salaries. It won't go into paying health worker salaries. So it won't sustain this government. And right now the ethical question is, what can that money be used for? So foreign governments are saying you can't build the capacity of the Taliban because they're a terrorist organization. So all you can do is basic humanitarian needs, and that's all you can do. So that's what what we call de facto government, because it's not a recognized government, is faced with. No capacity to govern, no readiness to govern, no money to govern. So that's why they're telling us, go out there and do whatever you have to do. And in a way, we've never been as free to go out there and do our work. It's the whole contradiction that we were trying to underline now. And I think it's a parenthesis because it won't last long until there's an uprising, until there's something else. Because right now the situation is really an in-between situation between a political crisis of 2021, a humanitarian crisis as it's happening now. But as Hervé said, and as Jawid and Zabi also said, this is the third government in a series of governments that has been misusing its position. And yeah, a lot of people are now asking whether a revolution will be next, whether people will come out and fight against this government. They know their position is unstable. So right now they're actually asking us to help them make their position stable. So it's a very, very difficult position also for us to be in. And for every organization that's there, and that's why Hervé was underlining this ethical component.
Juste pour revenir sur cette question, imaginons un moment qu'Éric Zemmour soit dans la salle. Éric Zemmour dirait sûrement, pourquoi est-ce qu'on balance 100 millions pour aider des gens? On n'a pas à faire ça. Alors, Éric Zemmour, c'est une bonne question, mais au fond, le dilemme est un peu plus complexe. Il ne s'agit pas d'aider les talibans à gouverner. Parce que sinon, effectivement, on dirait, voilà, maintenant, la France doit payer pour soutenir un gouvernement qui est totalement illégitime du point de vue des droits de l'homme, du point de vue de ses considérations, si on peut appeler ça comme ça, vis-à-vis des femmes, et aussi soutenir le salaire de Akhundzada qui a dit on n'est pas responsable pour la famine, etc. C'est pas l'enjeu. L'enjeu, c'est de se dire qu'effectivement, il y a 38 millions de personnes, il y en a 98% aujourd'hui sous le seuil de pauvreté. Avant c'était 70, c'était pas terrible, mais maintenant c'est 98, c'est plus compliqué. Les banques sont quasiment virtuellement fermées. Donc l'enjeu est différent. Il s'agit de donner, du point de vue humanitaire, un soutien à cette population. Et je dirais que ça, c'est presque une bonne nouvelle. Pourquoi? Parce que les gouvernements ne vont pas le faire pendant 20 ans. Les gouvernements ne vont pas donner des rustines à un pays sous perfusion de 40, puis 50, puis 60 millions de personnes pendant 20 ans. En revanche, aujourd'hui, il y a une vraie opportunité, parce qu'à la fois, on peut dire, OK, on envoie de l'humanitaire, et en même temps, on conditionne. On conditionne cet envoi humanitaire, et éventuellement un peu de développement, parce que sinon, ça se répète. Si vous n'investissez pas dans le développement dans un pays, l'année d'après, vous payez encore plus en humanitaire, puis encore plus, puis encore plus, puis encore plus. C'est tout bête. L'humanitaire, c'est un pansement, mais ça ne résout pas le problème. Le développement, c'est un traitement de fond. C'est un diagnostic et une solution, en théorie. Donc si on veut effectivement pouvoir dire à ce gouvernement, si on veut, dans une certaine mesure, améliorer le sort des populations, au-delà de l'aide immédiate qui est humanitaire, et sur laquelle tout le monde se bat aujourd'hui, eh bien, il faut aussi mettre une forme de conditionnalité et dire à ce gouvernement, sous réserve de certaines améliorations. Et pour ça, effectivement, ils ont besoin des ONG, des agences des UN humanitaires, donc pas toutes, et puis d'informations, donc d'agences comme la nôtre. Sous réserve de certaines améliorations dans certains domaines, et là il peut y avoir même un cahier des charges très pragmatique, eh bien les choses, l'aide n'arrivera plus. Et évidemment, encore une fois, c'était la même chose pour l'État islamique en Syrie, c'est la même chose aujourd'hui. Il est assez facile, et vous avez ça chez Machiavel, qui est important à Sciences Po, il est assez facile de conquérir un territoire. La vraie question, c'est comment le gouverner. Et c'est sur ce point-là que les États, soutenus par les agences humanitaires, qui sont neutres politiquement et dont le souci est évidemment la population, c'est là que la politique intervient, parce qu'il s'agit de dire aux talibans, vous avez l'humanitaire, ok, vous avez débloqué le couloir, mais ça c'est temporaire. L'année prochaine, vous aurez une révolution. Donc, on le sait, il va y avoir un changement de régime. Il faut avoir vraiment des discussions très très fortes, et en face à face, c'est très pragmatique avec les quelques-uns qui comprennent la situation chez les talibans. Et donc, il faut accompagner des changements pour plus de droits, pour les Afghans. Donc c'est vraiment un jeu à la fois humanitaire, immédiat, et un peu un billard à plusieurs bandes, où il s'agit d'avoir une logique plus politique, plus long terme, pour décadenasser, enfin, oui, vraiment un peu, oui, libérer de l'espace de négociation dans un pays qui sinon va dans le chaos. Et à une guerre civile, personne ne peut en connaître l'issue et le coût humain.
Okay, good evening. First, thank you, and congratulations, by the way, for the refugee statement. We're really happy for you. So my question, I have actually two questions. The first is more to Jawid, if you would like to be happy to answer. So why people fear Taliban, and from where Taliban gets its strengths? And the second question is more general, and it's about the concept of demonstration in the Afghani culture. Can we somehow predict some revolution against the Taliban regime in the future? Because you just mentioned that, and also because you said that in few days, or I remember months, it will be like 98% of people, below the poverty rate. So I would like to, if possible. Thank you.
On peut éventuellement prendre une dernière question et comme ça vous répondez en tout. Il y en a une, sinon. Non, c'est bon.
Okay. Thank you very much, first. Second, about the strength of the Taliban, where it comes from. Actually, if we look at back, we take a step back to the when the Taliban overthrown from the power in 2001, and after that they were disappeared for a while, and then slowly when the coalition forces did their kind of unintentionally or intentionally unacceptable behavior with the civilians, by making mistakes in their operations and killing civilians, resulting to civilian casualties, this made the Taliban a power. For example, civilians become part of Taliban. They were joining the Taliban to take a revenge from the international troops, take a revenge from the Afghan National Army. One. Second, the mentality, the religion. The religious studies and the one thing in common between the civilians and the Taliban is the religion, because when it comes to jihad, they said that our country is occupied by the Americans, and we announced jihad because they are killing us deliberately, and it was in a time that the civilians were thinking that we are being killed deliberately because of these airstrikes, because these night times raids. So therefore, many people ended up in jails and being killed. So the relatives of those people were joining the Taliban. So another strength. And the name of jihad, like using the name of jihad against the national army, against the police, against the Americans. And thirdly, the culture. I would like to bring this as a strength for the Taliban, because as Hervé mentioned, Pashtunwali is a culture that is meant to be in Pashtun tribes, and Taliban comes from the Pashtun tribes, and it gives in another leverage, another strength to them, because they think like sometimes the culture is mixing with Islam, with the religion, and they give us priority for the culture. So this culture gives another strength to the Taliban. I hope your question is answered.
And about your question on the, the protests, to bring a revolution. There has been, if you look back to the, to the story of the fight in Afghanistan, this revolution mostly happened with, violent, by fight, not, if we look back, through a few, all of this, from the, by Russian, the time that by Mujahideen is taken, it was by fight, then the Taliban by fight, The protest has been, is a way, of course, I hope it's not going to be, take place again, and is a way to put pressure on them. But I don't think that while they are taking this with the fight to give it back, with easy method. And that's why before I mentioned that might be again, this resistance and again to be to get it back from them.
Oui, pendant qu'on va chercher la question, juste pour revenir sur la question des talibans, il est très important de comprendre que quasiment chaque famille avait à la fois un soldat dans sa famille et un taliban. Donc il y a aussi une diversification du portefeuille, on va dire, politique dans les familles. Et l'autre chose, et ça je pense que c'est la grosse erreur politique qui a été faite depuis 20 ans, c'est que quand il était possible d'inclure les talibans à la table des négociations, parce qu'il ne faut pas oublier que les talibans font partie de l'Afghanistan. Nous, on les voit comme les méchants. Donc, parce qu'on a nécessairement, dans un pays compliqué, on a besoin d'une lecture dichotomique. Pendant les accords de Bonn, les talibans ont été exclus et beaucoup de gens qui connaissaient bien l'Afghanistan disaient « Mais oui, d'accord, on a battu les talibans, mais ils représentent quelque chose. Ils sont représentatifs par la culture, par certaines valeurs, des zones rurales. Et donc, si on les exclut politiquement, on va s'aliéner une grande partie de la population. Et c'est ce qui s'est passé. Et puis l'autre chose qu'a mentionné Jawid et qui est très importante, d'une part, l'instrumentalisation de la religion, puisque tous les talibans ont en commun de faire... Enfin, c'est l'idéologie des Obandis de haine des Anglais, après les guerres anglo-afghanes, et qui s'est retournée, qui s'est transférée en haine des Américains et des étrangers en général, et qui est un ressort très puissant pour faire marcher la religion. Et ça, c'est une instrumentalisation que vous avez à peu près... Enfin, c'est l'histoire des révolutions tourne autour de ça. Comment réussir à unifier la haine. Et la haine contre qui? Bien, finalement, les talibans, ils représentent quoi? Ils représentent peut-être un danger, mais au moins on les connaît. On parle la langue, c'est la même culture et la même religion. Alors qu'en face, à chaque frappe, et il y en a eu beaucoup, et ça, c'est pas dans les médias, mais vous l'avez sur les sites si vous allez un peu regarder, mais le site des Nations Unies, donc c'est des sites officiels, je ne parle pas de fake news. À chaque frappe américaine qui faisait des victimes afghanes, vous multipliez le nombre de talibans et de sympathisants, ou en tout cas de gens qui ne sont pas contre, d'autant plus. Un dernier point, quand est-ce que la France commence à se faire détester en Afghanistan? Et moi, je peux vous dire que je l'ai vu, je l'ai senti, je l'ai perçu, parce que je suis français et que j'ai une boîte là-bas. Très simple. 2010, Obama demande à Sarkozy, via l'OTAN, il serait pas mal quand même que la France rétablisse les raids de nuit. Alors qu'est-ce que c'est les raids de nuit? Jusque-là, la France en Afghanistan, c'est Massoud, Kouchner, BHL, on adore la francophonie, on comprend pas grand-chose au pays parce qu'on pense que tous les Afghans sont tadjiks, mais on est content. Et puis on finance des échanges culturels. Tout le monde adore. On adore les Français, Faransawi, parfait. Et puis quand même, il y a l'OTAN, Obama est très gentil, il a un prix Nobel, mais il dit à Sarko, j'aimerais bien quand même que vous fassiez votre boulot, comme les autres. Raid de nuit. Raid de nuit, c'est quoi? Vous avez un voisin qui me dénonce parce que soi-disant je suis sympathisant taliban, sans aucune preuve. Un peu comme les lettres de cachet. Vous allez avoir quatre soldats qui vont débarquer chez vous, 2 Français, 2 Afghans, qui écartent les femmes et les enfants, et qui vous descendent dans votre lit, et puis qui repartent. C'est ça les raids de nuit. La France rétablit ça. Une semaine après, vous avez des mesures qui sont prises contre les Français, vous avez une impopularité croissante, et ça c'est des choses qu'on ne perçoit pas, on dit « je ne comprends pas », et à l'ambassade ils ne comprennent rien. Mais c'est concrètement ce qui se passe dans un pays quand on oublie des éléments très très simples.
vous êtes de passage. Et les talibans, ils font partie de la culture de manière bien, même dans une certaine mesure, on pourrait argumenter avant même l'islam. Puisque dans certaines provinces de l'Afghanistan, il ne faut pas oublier, le Nouristan par exemple, que l'islam ne s'est imposé qu'à la fin du XIXe siècle. Donc vous voyez, c'est très subtil, c'est un patchwork et une marqueterie d'intérêt, et c'est pour ça que votre question est excellente. Merci.
Globally, with the slaughterings by the foreigners and extremism and terror by the Talibans, which one does the population supports the less or the most? I'm not sure. Thanks.
And I invite whomever will answer to speak on behalf of women and men. So give both.
Who supports it? You mean that the Talibans?
Maybe between the night raids and the arbitrary killings by the internationals and all the terror by the Taliban, which do the people prefer? Or
actually, to be honest, no one, prefer, killing of anyone. But actually, what happened with these many attacks happened by Taliban in Afghanistan. These suicide bombings and these attacks, people have, like a hate, in general, they are categories, they hate, them. Because, on a daily basis in attacks, many people lost their, their lives. And because of nothing, or without any objections, a reason that, and it was not a legitimate reason as well to killing people. But of course, there are people that that they are bombed. It has the two aspects. Then you have people that their houses were bombed by the night raids. They don't like these people because the foreigners, because they are bombed without any reasons. And so it is not very, very good. I cannot say that on our overall, yeah. We cannot say that anyone who do a bad things definitely is not has a good reputation. So
just to add to Zabi that Taliban and the U.S. were in fight, and they were fighting for winning, right? But who actually tolerating the losses? The general public, the civilians. And when it comes to the suicide attacks of the Taliban, if there was a target of one military vehicle, like hundreds of people wounded, civilians wounded or injured or killed, for only one commander, targeting one commander in a suicide bomb attack. The same goes for the U.S. airstrikes. They were looking for a single Talib, or two or three, but they were bombing a larger area. They were actually using heavy ammunition than it used to be. So what I mean is the civilians were more in trouble because the more of the casualty were the target of being target. The civilians were being target of both sides, from the U.S. airstrikes or for the Taliban terror and killings. So we were the civilians, and all the loss came to us, not because they were fighting for the winning, not taking care of the civilians. Thank you.
Just Hervé Nicolle. So I think one thing that every Afghan said after August was we wanted the Americans to leave, but we didn't want the Talibans to come. So they weren't faced, you're putting a choice that Afghans actually never had. They never had the opportunity to choose one over the other. And the problem is that they wanted the Americans to leave. It was an occupation. They felt it as an occupation. Even young, educated women in Kabul would tell you that much. They felt under an occupation. They were living in a country at war, but they didn't want what came after. But the thing is, they never were asked to choose. So this was imposed on them. So I think both were two very different types of extremes of what they had to face. And it's something they had to suffer under, but neither of them was their choice. And so the problem at the end of the day is that. But I think if you now ask women, girls, what they feel, I think I've seen it definitely in my interviews over 14 years. When I arrived in Afghanistan in 2007 and I asked women what it was to live under the Taliban in the 1990s, they told me all they ever saw were the four walls of their rooms, and that they felt that they were trapped in a prison inside their homes. In March, when I went back and did a study for the World Bank on women whose husbands had left, they felt the same trap, and they were telling me already in March, we feel trapped in our homes. We're not allowed to go out when our husbands are away. We've basically lost our lives. So that was under Ghani. And then today, it's been 87 days that girls can't go to school. So in all of these, and that's what Zabi was also mentioning, is government after government, women and girls really didn't have their rights respected. And it's one trade-off for another.
Yeah, just I want to add, if you remember that at the beginning of my, because, I had my speech was a bit long, but I couldn't cover a lot, so, because I didn't want to, take a lot of time, but I did actually. To be, as mentioned, all of these, cruelty, corruptions and everything was, people were, frustrated with the government, to be honest, sometimes if you go to one of those, an institution at the government, at the end you were saying that God, either take me or take this, To be honest, I was hearing this in my face, and I said myself to myself, because you were in the hand of, very professional corrupt people, and you had to deal with that. From that things, at the beginning I mentioned people were expecting a change, a positive change, but they didn't actually, as Nassim mentioned, they were not expecting that. And at the beginning I mentioned the Yom al-Batar. They were waiting for, praying that do not face with another worst day, but unfortunately again, worst day repeated in the history of Afghanistan.
Alors, quelques mots de conclusion, à moins qu'il y ait d'autres questions. Alors, très simplement, pour revenir sur ce Stay and Deliver, qu'est-ce qu'on peut retenir et à quelles conditions est-ce qu'on pourra rester et délivrer dans le futur en Afghanistan? Eh bien, on l'a vu, ça a été très bien dit, et dans vos questions aussi, ça affleure beaucoup, je trouve. Il faut sortir d'une logique de dichotomie, qui est de se dire les talibans de manière uniforme, c'est pas bien, et les Nations Unies ou la présence occidentale, non, c'est pas aussi simple. Il faut ne pas hésiter ici à voir les choses avec un peu plus de nuances et de sens de la complexité. Aujourd'hui, évidemment, les talibans, c'est un régime terroriste, ça fait pas de doute. En 2001, quand la présence internationale faisait que les talibans avaient été dispersés, il y avait sans doute une porte pour les inclure dans un dialogue qui aurait pu inclure l'ensemble de la population afghane, sans exclure, sans avoir de position d'exclusion, parce qu'ils représentent d'une certaine manière, qu'on le veuille ou non, une partie de la population afghane. Tous les intellectuels et les middle class qui vivent en centre-ville ne représentent pas l'Afghanistan. Là, vous n'avez pas, avec Zabi et Jawid, l'Afghanistan réel. Il y a aussi des gens qui sont certes très gentils, mais qui vivent en zone rurale et qui pourront vous égorger si vous avez un regard de travers pour leurs filles. Donc, il faut bien comprendre que dans ce contexte-là, on ne peut exclure aucune composante de la population. Et cette logique d'inclusion aurait pu éviter beaucoup des problèmes qui ont pu surgir après. Ensuite, la deuxième chose, c'est sans doute que quand on dit stay and deliver, oui, mais si la communauté internationale, par les ONG, revient, d'abord par le biais humanitaire, et puis peut-être, sous certaines conditions, par le biais de développement, il y aura des conditions imposées aux talibans, bien sûr, mais il y aura aussi des conditions imposées aux agences des Nations Unies. Il y a des conditions en termes de... Jawid a mentionné les coûts, quand il dit que 0,7 sur $1, 70% vont en coûts opérationnels, ça veut dire quoi? Ça veut dire que peut-être 20 centimes, 10 centimes, 15 centimes vont aller effectivement aux populations. Le reste, ça va où? Frais de fonctionnement. Est-ce que c'est cohérent si ces ONG étaient des entreprises privées? Je ne suis pas sûr qu'elles survivraient. Et je ne suis pas en train de faire l'apologie du privé, soyons clairs. Donc, il va y avoir des vrais questionnements, aussi sur la question du mandat. Est-ce qu'on peut accepter des stratégies d'1 an en permanence? Est-ce qu'on peut accepter des logiques si court-termistes? Ce n'est pas certain. Et puis, la dernière chose, ce qui vous concerne plus directement, pour revenir à ce que je disais tout à l'heure, quel rôle pouvez-vous avoir là-dessus? En tant que citoyen, en tant que, au sens gramsciste, vous êtes des intellectuels, parce que vous faites partie des classes moyennes, vous faites partie des gens qui font des études, vous faites partie des gens qui avaient un regard sur la société, quel que soit ce regard du reste. Eh bien, vous avez aussi un poids. Vous avez une capacité à porter un poids. Si je prends le cas de Sciences Po, sans l'appui de Sciences Po, il est probable que la femme de Zabi resterait en Afghanistan. Grâce à l'appui de Sciences Po, qui s'est constitué comme citoyen alors que personne ne lui demandait, la femme de Zabi, elle va peut-être pouvoir le rejoindre. De la même manière, vous pouvez faire poids localement, mais pas que localement, sur vos gouvernants. Vous n'êtes pas simplement là pour regarder les nouvelles. Dans le futur, déjà en tant qu'étudiant, mais dans le futur, dans vos positions respectives, quels que soient vos choix professionnels, vous aurez cette opportunité. Si vous la lâchez, vous lâchez tout. C'est tout. Merci.